3, 2,
Two,
1.
one.
Let's
go! Yes! Yes!
Yes, indeed.
The amount of energy in this show. Welcome to the PBE podcast with Mr. Alan Bertagne. Skips is always here, the co-host of the Permian Basin Experience podcast, and we had certainly experience from the Permian Basin and a hell of an experience just in this show. Skippo, catch me up, man. The latest, the greatest. What have you been up to, man?
Dude, just grinding on the PhD, man. I mean,
go!
Whoa.
It's been
Excellent.
it's been a blast. I mean, for me, just kind of taking all the knowledge that I've had and learned here in the US and applying it in Australia. It's been just amazing. It's been amazing just having my mind blown by the geology there and, just the little nuances of, how they do. I mean, for example, I know I've talked to you about this off air, but in Australia, they classify their basins in a stratotectonic framework. So, for example, the Permian Basin would be known as the Tobosa Basin, and that would be your lower Paleozoic section. And then they would be the Permian Basin, which would probably be your Pen through your Permian. And then they would call something else for, your Mesozoic section, right? So based on the tectonics through time, that's how everything's been broken down. But yeah, it's just been a blast just diving into data and just, letting my mind just, wrap my head around as many publications as I can. It's just been absolutely out of control. And I know you've been in San Antonio doing some things, and now you're finally back at the Institute and back to grinding again.
That's right. Yeah. Start an oil and gas company. And let's find out what happens.
Good things are going to happen.
Yeah. I'm looking at Australia on Cracks of the World map. What part of Australia is your PhD, Skippo? Just real quick.
It's in the GAB, so it's in Queensland, Australia, so northeast Australia. So the Great Artesian Basin, and specifically the Arkoma Basin. The study area that I have is around the size of the Permian Basin. So
completely onshore.
But
onshore.
The deeper part is called Cooper, isn't it?
Yeah. The Cooper Basin is just west of the Arkoma. Yeah. So the Cooper Basin is part of the whole GAB, so the Great Artesian Basin. But yeah, the Cooper Basin is where there's active oil and gas production now, and then they're trying to do a full resource evaluation of these other basins, and that's kind of the nice thing. They've kind of given me, the free reign to just let my mind do its thing, obviously under control and guidance, but they're letting me kind of just be Skips.
and by the way, 3 of our students' teams are working right now in the Cooper Arkoma Basin in the oil part. So we'll invite you to some of our student presentations.
I need to talk to all of them.
Absolutely. You'll be very welcome.
And pick their brains apart.
Well, yeah, we've got some really good teams. We've got, University of North Dakota, University of Perugia, Italy.
Ooh.
And I'm trying to remember, who's the third one? Memphis. That's right. Memphis. Oh. So you want to come meet some good people. By the way, Perugia, Italy, they have the chocolate festival there every year. I haven't been. I want to go. Let's do a show over there.
Hey, I'm in. No question. We can stay with some family.
Okay.
He's got family there. Couch or floor. We don't care. We're going. I'm open for that invite. That sounds awesome. I can't believe that tied together. That was awesome. That would be a great second follow-up show between doing more with Mr. Allen and doing more about what evolved and everything that we're doing. We're really integrating this network and expanding this network that we've built from the Permian experience. Now we're expanding it out. And so traditionally in our introductions, we like to say, what dropped out? What was it about this show? The time spent in the last couple of hours. What did you get from this show, Mr. Bertagne?
I love the energy and enthusiasm that you guys bring. I think that is contagious. I think we need a lot of that in our industry, really. There's a lot of doom and gloom. And, the only way we're going to keep going is if we're enthused about Mother Nature, in part. And, there's going to be ups and downs, but you need the energy. You got to keep going. I like your style. I really, said that to my young colleagues, that you guys bring a tremendous energy. I think you're entrepreneurs. The future will be more entrepreneurial than it has been in the last 50 years. Those simple careers, 30 years, one company, retire, largely gone. It's going to be, you make it up as you go along, and you keep learning new things. You keep developing new ideas. You guys are both doing that. And, I hope to keep working with you. I work with a mentor who's, I'm going to say, about 30 years older than I am. And so I tell the students, well, you think I'm an old guy who's going to retire? I'm going to be working for another 30 years, touch wood. And so I hope I'm going to work with you guys for another 30 years. I really enjoy working with you. I think you're great, and I'm going to support your show.
Right on. Likewise, sir. Likewise.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad we were able to cross paths. And it's just like you said, I mean, everything going on for all of us, but we were able to somehow join in. And Jonathan Torres, who set it up and said, man, I think this would be a great show. And what kind of his vision of that and making that connection. I mean, we have many, many shows to do, I think, together. I think we have an incredible amount of value to bring in every one of these shows that we can do. And maybe we get together for this live show. We've been talking about going to Midland, end of April. Now we might change that date a little bit, but it's going to be within the next month or two. And we want to go live from Midland, from the destination, with all the technology and all these ideas. We bring in legends from the Permian that we grew up listening about. We get to talk to them. We get a live band. I mean, it's going to be the real deal, and it's going to be a lot of good information, new information applied to new real world applications. Skips, what dropped out for you from this?
Oh man, I mean, Alan is someone now that I aspire to be by the end of my career, being able to, like you said, take risk at a very young age and learn from those risks, and not, like you're saying, putting your head down and saying, I'm done with oil, I'm going to just get into consulting or, some other industry. It's like you put you put the pedal to the metal and you kept grinding away. And like you said, it was that enthusiasm that you have, that, you went from starting your own company to now all of a sudden now you're investing in a $2 billion venture as a working interest owner. And then now how you're passing it down to the next generation and inspiring and mentoring these students with Evolve. I mean, this whole show was just from start to finish, just fantastic.
And I would, quick closing comment, when I work with young people, it's like, really, all I want to see is that you're motivated and you're interested. And my good friend Mario, who's sitting right there, he just showed up in my office one day, mutual introduction. And he said, I'm interested in this business. I said, that's good enough for me. You come with me and we'll figure things out. Yeah. To be honest, I didn't know what he could do, really. And you mentioned Jonathan Torres, kind of the same thing. And of course, before that, I think you met Jesus Navarez.
Yep.
And, everybody has kind of unique sets of skills that they bring. And each of my three colleagues here have actually quite different sets of skills that have really helped us as we have worked together. Jesus is incredibly good on the workstation, the data management, attention to detail. Yeah. Mario, you can kind of get a sense. He's our kind of marketing and, graphics. And the reason we're in a lot of these things we're doing is courtesy of Mario. And Jonathan, I was kind of trying to figure him out. And one day I said, Jonathan, I think you're kind of a wheeler dealer guy. You kind of create opportunities. And he created this. We're here because of Jonathan. So again, young people, just give them a chance.
Yeah.
Let them bring out their skills, and they're going to do a lot of good stuff. And that's what I'm in part here to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what you created, and that's what I got from this show. Is personally, the concept that we actually go through in our reality of making an investment, and it's simple as your time and your attention into the investment. And the fact that you're not going to get a return necessarily on that investment for many, many years to come. You're planting seeds, you're feeding them, you're nourishing them. You built this foundation to allow them to grow and to be well fed. That is potentially what is the biggest missing component that I see with what's going on after this reshuffle. And what are we all doing? We're all investing a lot more in our own time and attention. We're all certainly investing a lot more in our own time and attention. And you're going to make mistakes. You need to be ready to manage these mistakes, and you'll be fine. You need to integrate with your investment, which is your network. That's what it's really all about. This Evolve is an amazing network that's going to be developing in all directions for 40, 50 years. And you're making that investment. You built this. And man, if we can be a part of that in any way and do these shows and help explain what they're doing and how we can talk about more of this, I think this is absolutely the future. And I enjoyed this show tremendously. Let's officially start the conception part of the show with Mr. Alan Bertagne. So that the notes were incredible. And as the conception part of the show, traditionally with PBE podcasts, and always, we just want to get to know you. It's like,
Okay.
we're at the convention. We just ran into each other. I want to know everything about you from the beginning. But with your notes, I want to specifically cover, obviously, where you're from. There's an interesting story there. And Skippo, I'll ask you this question while we learn his story. How many guests do you think we've had on the show that were actually born in the Permian Basin? I want to ask you that question. Think about it, because I was thinking about it. I said, I don't know. I really don't know. And so we'll go with that, obviously, into academia, your young professional career. And really what struck me on the kind of part two of this is when you started your own company, and then that led to managing a $2 billion fund for exploration.
Well, just to be exact, I was one of the employees. I was not the person managing it, but I was very close in there. There were about 15 of us, so I saw it close up.
Yeah. Wow. So that's going to be awesome. That's what we want to dive into. I want to get to know you, Mr. Bertagne. I gave you a nickname. I said, Alan popping bottles of champagne Bertagne.
I'll take it. Well, you know, we've come up with various nicknames as we've thought about things. I will tell you one real quick here, which is, you know, obviously my core strength is geophysics and seismic interpretation. So I have a little lab coat next door, like, you know, a doctor's coat. Yeah. And my wife came up with, how about we call you Dr. Allen, the geophysician? And anyway, so I think I might prefer yours. Yeah.
Well, I just want to warn you, if you give Troy the go-ahead on this, it probably will stick.
Okay. Let's take it.
Based on personal experience.
Let's break new ground. Yeah.
All right. So you were born in the Permian Basin, sir. Tell us about it.
I was indeed. So first of all, I should tell you, I'm right behind me is the background. Not many of you may have heard of, even those who live in the Permian Basin may not have heard of Slayton, Texas, small town just a short distance southeast of Lubbock. And the reason I was born here, and I almost wasn't, is, of course, I'm second generation oil business. My dad was in the oil business, so I can really say I've lived my entire life in the oil business. So my dad and my family were living over in Egypt at the time. He had been stationed to do basic exploration in Egypt. And so my mom was there. And
who was he working for?
Well, you know, I believe at the time it was like they called the companies by local names. I think they called it Sahara Petroleum, but it was part of Conoco, really.
Okay.
And then, you know, later, by the way, we may talk about that later, we went to Libya, and they called that Oasis Oil Company. But that was really just part of Conoco. Wow. So anyway, there we were in Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, very well, you know, very famous place. And my parents were married. My mother was expecting, and I was about to be born in Egypt. And then a piece of history hit, something called the Suez Crisis. 1956 was the Suez Crisis. It's probably more familiar to people in Europe, but it was a big event. It was basically where some of the European countries took possession of the Suez Canal from Egypt. And the U.S. at the time, President Eisenhower, was not supportive of that. So anyway, the U.S. kind of stepped in and said some things. But the bottom line, before the situation was settled, they took all the non-Egyptian people, including my family, they put them on World War II landing craft vessels, shipped them onto boats, and sent them away. And by the way, took possession of all their houses and furniture.
Oh my God.
So anyway, long story short, if it wasn't for that, you know, well-known European, I'll call it North African piece of history, I would have been born in Alexandria in Egypt. But the good Lord's smiled on me, and so I ended up being born in Slayton, Texas.
Wow.
Of course, as geologists, we should say, if you get a map of the Horseshoe Atoll or Atoll, depending how you present it, you pronounce it, you'll see that Slayton, Texas is in there very close. So you talk about being born in the heart of the oil business, the Permian Basin itself. But boy, the Horseshoe Atoll being close to that, what a way to start your life. So I got off to a good start.
Yep. And you get academia. You got your bachelor's degree in geology. You move into the University of Texas, Austin. And now you're getting a lot of information about the Permian. When did you actually learn the Horseshoe Atoll? How old were you when you actually realized you were born in the Horseshoe Atoll?
That, I mean, maybe around college time or
Right.
undergraduate. Now, because my dad was in the oil business, we traveled all over the world. So I have to tell you, my time in heaven, Slayton, Texas, was actually very short lived because before I was even 1 year old, he got shipped down to Venezuela.
Wow.
And
Oh.
so we go down. My brother was born in Venezuela.
Wow.
So what they call it when you're in Venezuela, and by the way, my good friend Mario here is from Venezuela. When you're born in Maracaibo, they call you Maracucho. So it's funny. Here I was born in the Permian Basin. My brother was born in Lake Maracaibo, another great oil region. He was a Maracucho. Anyway, then long story short, I ended up in the UK because my dad was transferred there for a while. So I did my undergraduate work there, Imperial College. That's probably the first time I really started to understand geology, to answer your question. So, during my undergraduate days.
Is that the university that actually developed or came up with the IBA program in the Imperial Barrel Award?
I was there at the inception of IBA. My professor,
that is crazy.
I was a student of Professor Richard Selly, and he came up with this. So what we did is he ran the master's program, and we, the little rinky-dink undergrads, we got to sit in and watch the big guys, the graduate students.
Oh, yeah.
And so he conceived this thing before it became IBA, where he did all the graduate students had their own presentations, and he would bring in big names from Shell, like a very well-known name, Dr. Glennie. Some of you may have heard of him. He's the person that did all the work on sand dunes, because in the North Sea they discovered oil in sand dunes, and so Shell sent Dr. Glennie to all the deserts of the world. He was there, one of the judges. Chevron had a judge. So literally, Dr. Richard Selly came up with this at Imperial College. I was one of the little undergrads watching it, and so that is indeed the same one. So
I was going to say, so not only did oil come in the family, but I mean, as far as your education was concerned, the conception of the one of the most prestigious programs now, and for all graduate oil and gas geologists.
Wow,
that's incredible.
I watched.
I'm not saying the cards were stacked in your favor for oil and gas, but I'm pretty
Well, what I will tell you is that it was fun watching it, but at that time, again, before it became Imperial Barrel with AAPG, the teams had to come in and draw their own come up with clever names, right, and have their own logos. And I'll never forget one team. I think there were some guys from Norway.
Best logo.
And they called themselves Rock Bottom Oil Company, and it was like little carving of a backside of a human being. So I'll never forget Rock Bottom Oil, And anyway, but that I was there. I will tell you, we may talk about this later. There are people who are inspirational, and Richard Selly. And by the way, we just had a reunion from our class who graduated around that time. And I saw him there and talked to him, had a picture with him. Wow. But he was really inspirational. When we were just undergrads, he was so cool. He was so excited about the oil business. And I'll share a quick story that I think your young listeners, or younger than me, might be interested in. I told him, I said, well, isn't oil going to run out, Dr. Selly? Don't you think that I should be thinking about something else? And he told me, not in your lifetime. Don't even worry about it. And if you ask me, we're going to still be needing oil for the career of this next generation. We're going to gradually transition. Sure, we're going to transition and everything, but hey, we're still going to need shirts and plastic and other things. So there's a future still for those interested in the E&P business.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
The transition is not today by any means. Otherwise, it would already happen. I mean, the industry was under the most stress in all of its history to be replaced by any alternative, and they couldn't do it. Couldn't step up and get it done. Regulatory, whatever you want to call it, just bad engineering that doesn't work that well. Whatever you want to call the results of what that was, it didn't work. And so now we realize that there's no way to move forward and keep doing what we do without a healthy price for the barrel and a lot of people to work out there and get this efficient energy back out of the ground. Demand is coming up. Supply has been drastically shut down. And now we're supposed to respond like this amazing, quick, we are efficient, but come on. It ain't going to happen overnight. There's literally the physical hands. There's not enough people that even know how to do what we do. I mean, you just get the reality. So I'm in favor of a record price probably within the next few years. I'm just going to go ahead and say it because we're not going to be able to respond to this demand. And that's the reality of putting your eggs in a basket, thinking that there was going to be some transition, and it ain't here. It ain't here.
Yeah.
We got to work. Let's get back to work. Good. I don't know.
And I'll make another quick point along those lines. I may be messing up your order here. I don't know, but
no.
But
That's the
what I'll
beauty of
tell
it.
you is, we'll talk later. I work a lot with students. I'm passionate about the next generation, and I want them not to make all the many mistakes I made and be a success.
Huge.
And I'm being a little bit facetious, but no, hey, we all learn lessons, right? And we
Right.
can make somebody else do a little bit better.
Oh,
But
man.
there is no doubt that many of the students right now, maybe most, are very interested in the transition. They're very interested in carbon capture. They're very interested in geothermal, groundwater. And you know what I tell them? Do you know what the best training to be a carbon capture geoscientist is? To be a petroleum geologist.
Oil and gas geology.
Why? What is the
You
best
need to
training
find
to be a
you need to find
groundwater?
void space in the subsurface, right?
There it is.
Good at-
And here's the big difference. And this is why I'm not kind of joking. As oil companies, we chase a big prize, right? It's worth a lot of money. So we can afford to go acquire, like you had your guest from Fairfield that talked to you about all those nodes and those recording channels.
That's
We
right.
can afford that technology. So when I, as a geoscientist, sit down here, I've got the best information, the Schlumberger logs, the whatever,
Right.
geochemical data, the latest state-of-the-art seismic. When
Yeah.
you're looking for groundwater, you got two little electrodes and you stick them in the ground, and then you get like these little circular things that are magnetic fields. And you
Yeah.
got to interpret that.
That's right. Yeah. Or you get two hangers, and when you cry, the hangers will cry. When you hit water, those babies turn.
That's their equivalent for the seismic method,
Yeah.
maybe. But in all fairness, the main point I'm making is that you've got to learn that multidisciplinary, as we call it, which means logs, rock,
More than ever.
geochemistry, grav mag. And the best place to learn that is in E&P. And so that's why I tell the students, you want the best training to be a carbon capture geologist, go work at an oil company for a while. Now, if you go straight to carbon capture, that's fine. And I think many will, but you could still start in the oil business, be productive in the short term, and be preparing for where you want to go as a carbon capture geoscientist or groundwater.
I definitely believe you make some very, very good points there, especially from the perspective of working in oil and gas, because in doing so, you understand the workflow to get to that, find that void space for carbon capture as efficiently as possible, opposed to, because, in oil, you need to get that, you need to find your next prospect, right? As quickly and as effectively as possible. And that's just something that a lot of other industries, they don't have that sense of urgency that oil and gas does. So with that, having that as your backbone for either carbon capture or hydrology, I think is invaluable.
So I will tell you that we work with the students and we have lots of mentors. I happen to have, well, I hate to say it, about 40 years of experience. I have someone else who's got 60 years of experience, still passionate about the industry, by the way. And I joke with the students. I say, do you know who the best carbon capture geoscientist is in the room? Me, or if the 60-year person is there, him. He spent 60 years thinking about the subsurface and the complexities of Mother Nature. He's going to be the best. I might be the second best in the room.
Now, it's interesting we talk about carbon capture so much because it's a fascinating subject and it does have a lot of attention. It looks like there's definitely a lot of money going in there. We can pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and start messing with that. What's interesting is it's difficult enough to find a body of rock that has the porosity and permeability and the caps that you can actually keep it and do something with it. But it goes beyond that. Carbon gases injected into reservoirs is definitely a chemical reaction going on. It's doing physical and chemical things. So what we really need to do, probably in my opinion, with carbon sequestration is find not only where you have void space and porosity, permeability that you need, the cap rock, but the byproduct should try to create as much hydrogen as possible. We need more hydrogen in our atmosphere. That's what the planet is constantly kind of losing. Hydrogen and helium burn off the atmosphere, everything else stays. But those two we're losing. So if we can do anything, let's get some of that back in the system. Maybe that will settle things down or actually do something that we can actually measure and see. I'm interested to see if anybody's going that way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert on carbon capture. I do hear the students express a lot of interest. And again, I think our petroleum geoscience training will be fantastic. And I will tell you a quick thing is the biggest thing in carbon capture in some ways is the seal, because that carbon CO2 tends to leak. And that's what they're finding in the real world. It looks good, and then guess what? It leaks. So now you're burning CO2 to run pumps to run a carbon CO2 recycling system, which is highly inefficient. You're making things worse.
Wow.
Good news is that, I think there's some great sites here in the US. Again, it's all about the seals. We got great sites here in the US with outstanding seals.
See?
So we're going to have a big carbon capture future for those who are interested right here in the Permian Basin, in the Gulf of Mexico, onshore.
Wow, that's awesome. Those chimneys of CO2 need to be turned into just hydrogen and helium, things we need back. If we can get that going, that transition, man, what amazing ingenuity and just accomplishment for humans to get something like that done. That would be amazing. Yeah, right in the Permian, you're saying.
Yeah.
I think so. I think all these basins, we're lucky in the US. We've got some very large basins. We've got some, we have some very complex ones, but relatively undeformed ones. And, where it's less deformed, like the Permian Basin, it has its complex parts, but a lot of it kind of subsided gently. And if you're in the Denver Basin, a lot of it subsided gently, the Illinois Basin. So those are great places. Now, somebody showed me their what am I going to poster child pilot project in Southeast Asia. I won't name any countries. And they said, here's a seismic line across my pilot project. The government wants to inject all our CO2 in. And I looked at that seismic line. I said, that must be one of the most faulted areas I've ever seen. And you guys are going to start injecting in there? I said, you better tell the government to call me as a consultant. I'm going to tell them not to put their CO2 in there.
Right, unless it makes a good product. If it has a good byproduct, then do it. But if it doesn't, that's the
Anyway, sorry if I'm throwing your cycle off here of what you were trying to do, but
no, please no. There is no cycle. These conversations are amazing. It's really something that's I'm captivated by your experience and your ability to kind of share that wisdom and knowledge that you have in your stories and how they relate. It's just I'm loving this conversation. Definitely. Take us into starting your own company. What did you learn as a new owner and all that stuff? How did that transition into ultimately what I'd like to get a little bit more on before the drill down, and maybe we can go deeper in the drill down on this subject, but that $2 billion, that investment on exploration, a huge budget, huge team, huge focus. I love the sound of that story.
Okay. Well, let's start with my first company. And, now I should tell you, I lived in the UK, right? And, in the UK, I don't know if anybody around in the Permian Basin watches things like Monty Python. There's a certain sense of humor in the UK. So if ever something I say sounds a little bit odd or kind of joking, I might be using the English sense of humor. So just I'm not trying to offend anybody. But let's start by talking about myself. So I like to tell my story. So there I was, like you say, good start, right? Imperial College. I went to UT Austin. And you know what? I was there at the boom of student hiring. So 1980, I had like 5 job offers or something like that. I was so cocky, as were all of us, with these recruiters in those days. It was like, you know what? And I was talking to Exxon. I said, yeah, they're the biggest. Yeah. Hey, Mr. Recruiter at Exxon. He was a big name. And I said, I want to go to Denver. And he goes, oh, okay, let me see. Next thing I know, I'm in Denver.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now, by the way, a tip for your young people, one of the people who interviewed with that same person, and he was, like I say, a big name within Exxon. He said to that person, so Fred, where do you see yourself in about 5 years? And Fred said, well, probably working for an independent or something like that.
Wow.
Obviously, Fred didn't get too far in that interview process. But anyway, long story short, in Denver, I arrived in December of 1980. 1981, you may remember, was a big peak in the prices. And anyway, then I like to say, so I had one good year in my career, and it's been downhill ever since. In 1981, go look at the price charts.
Right.
But anyway, but long story short, come 1984, I kind of concluded that, I could do more than I could do in a corporate environment. So the way I like to tell my funny story is, I spent about 4 years in the oil business. I decided I knew everything there was to know about the oil business. So I just decided to form my own oil company or my own consulting company at the time. That was my first business. 4 years of experience. I don't know, 26 years old or maybe 27 years old. So apparently what I didn't know is about prices, because I picked like the worst time ever, because I did this just before the crash of 86. So here I am, this enthusiastic person from Exxon, you know, and I come to the crash of 86, and you all know what happened in the crash of 86. Oil dropped tremendously. So suddenly here I am as just one little person. And by the way, a bit of information for everybody if you don't know this. When you're at Exxon, you know, you're viewed by everybody as representing Exxon. So guess what? When I was at Exxon, oh, Alan, let's take you out to lunch. You know, you want to come to lunch? Hey, we're inviting you to whatever it was, you know, the golf tournament, etc. When I go out, Alan, on my own, it's like, Alan? I don't know if I remember you.
Oh, man.
I'm kind of, again, that's my little English humor exaggerating. But just remember, when you're representing a company, it's one thing. When you're on your own, it's another thing. Anyway, I had to work through the crash of 86, and I actually brought a few people, a small team around me. And it was a tough time. I mean, there was no work, no consulting work, etc. But somehow I got through that. And here's what I'll tell you, that those lessons I learned in the crash of 86, I have kept with me for my whole career. Wow. So when people say, oh, you know, Alan, he's so cheap, you know, when he can buy $1,000 desk, he buys the $50 desk. Guess what? That's the lessons of the crash of 86. Wow. So I've never forgotten those lessons. This industry, I recommend that most people try and live with the 1986 or whichever crash is your favorite one mindset, because things go up and things go down. But if you're kind of operating at a very cost-effective level, you'll find a way to make it through.
Right, absolutely.
So anyway, sorry about maybe kind of roundabout, but yeah, that was the first company. Wow. You know, I survived, and it taught me to be creative and think about business development. And that has stood me in good stead through my career. And I recommend everybody get familiar with that aspect. Business.
I mean, at the time, obviously it wasn't, you know, a good thing to happen, but you know, in the long term, those lessons that you've learned are invaluable, I feel. I mean, you would not be in the position you are today if that crash didn't happen when it did. I mean, am I right? Or okay.
You're absolutely right. And you know, there were kind of really key moments where it's like, oh, do I continue with this or do I not? And then something would happen, you know, like out of the blue, somebody, and there's a situation where I was really coming to a difficult position. You know, I owed some money, et cetera, and then the phone rings. It's like, hey, Alan, would you like, and I happen to speak French, as you could tell maybe by my name, and somebody says, hey, I'm running a seismic crew in Spain. It's CGG. They're a French company. Nobody can understand what the heck they're saying, sort of thing. And again, a little bit of exaggeration. But no, you know, would you like to be the bird dog on the seismic crew? And I said, of course, that's up my alley.
What's a bird dog?
A bird dog, someone who QCs, whatever you know, like the equivalent of someone who goes on a rig when you got a logging run to make sure that the job is done right. Wow. So this was the oil company saying, I got these guys in the field. And obviously, the exploration manager doesn't want to be there in the field. He says, you come here, you speak French, you can work with them, you can build the rapport. So
was this onshore or offshore?
It was onshore in the Pyrenees. Okay. So by the way, beautiful place just north of Barcelona, if any of you have ever been there. So here I am, you know, it's like, oh, okay, I got to go check on the seismic crew climbing up this hillside in these peaks with these great views. You know, wow, that's a tough assignment.
Oh, man, that's rough. How did you survive?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I had what's called the Costa Brava close by. That's, by the way, Salvador Dali was born right there on the Costa Brava. So you got things to see. But the main thing on that story, it's not so much about the speaking the French, but it's about being able to relate to them and build a rapport with a French seismic crew. So it takes a French-speaking person, you know. So, but that was an example of where I was kind of at the end of my tether, so to speak. And it's like, man, maybe I need to give up on this oil business stuff. And the phone rings completely out of the blue. And, you know, someone had heard of me, obviously, through some back channel, but there you go. So this industry has ups and downs. Sometimes you got to persevere, and there will be tough times. You know, I'm not going to say there won't be to the next generation.
I feel like you're speaking directly to me. It just relates with so much of 2020 and where things have gone and how it's gone. I mean, it's amazing to hear that story and still see your enthusiasm. That's what can't be beaten down. We got to have the enthusiasm. That's all we got at the end of the day. Anyway.
Well, we're fortunate. I happen to be in the part of the oil business where we try to understand Mother Nature, one of my favorite topics. And, that is so challenging. No matter how many millions of nodes we put on the surface to get the wiggles that I love to look at, no matter what the latest log curve is that, our friends at Schlumberger are developing, we still don't fully understand it. We're still making our best guess. So Mother Nature will always keep us challenged. I like to say, what we do is far more involved than any Sherlock Holmes, novel you may read, or Poirot, or whatever. I mean, this is real detective work here. It's not just, this is the real world. So that's what keeps many people going. Just the endless challenges. You got to be curious, and there's always more insight you can gain. You can keep trying, and from the business side, you get that extra insight. You got a business opportunity. You can make some money, hopefully.
Wow. All right. This has just transitioned on its own into the drill down segment of the PBE podcast, because what I think we just built and designed is a great discussion around I want to talk basic fundamentals of geophysics and how we use it to de-risk our exploration. I want to talk about that, apply to the Permian Basin, your perspective, get some of those challenges you are aware of, and how are you, deconvolving that. I would love to talk about that. And then at the end of the drill down, let's dive into that $2 billion adventure that you were on.
Okay.
Getting that exploration and going after that. That's what we want to do in the drill down. Are you guys up for that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Okay.
All right. So we are officially in the drill down segment with Alan Bertagne. Sir, please doctor us up on the fundamentals of sound waves penetrating a layered earth, reflecting off those layers, coming back to microphones, and recording what those layers could be possibly doing in the subsurface, providing an image of what this layering looks like at high resolution. Fundamentally explain that, please.
Well, the way I like to explain it to lay people, not that your audience is necessarily that, but I like to start with ultrasounds, right? Most people now have seen babies and ultrasounds.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just ultrasounds of the earth. They have very similar character. I mean, an ultrasound, you put it there on a mother's belly, and it does the same thing. It sends little waves down. They bounce off the baby. And so what do you see, first of all, when you look at the ultrasound? You see the overall shape, right? So you can see the head, you can see hands.
Hard parts, yep.
Yeah, so you see the shape, and seismic is fantastic and has been fantastic for many years at seeing shapes. And of course, we all know oil's lighter than water, so we can see where the oil goes up to, right? Structural anticlines or three-way closures against the fault. So seismic has always been great at mapping structure, even in the days when it was 2D, when my dad was shooting the seismic in Slayton, Texas. So that's the first thing. But, of course, over time, the more nodes we put out there, like your Fairfield person told you, et cetera, the sharper those images, the more we see those small faults that could impact the reservoir compartments and everything. So first of all, we see the shape. And so we make structure maps, just like geologists do in the field with their plane tables and so on. So that's key. And that's really important. Mm-hmm. Now, the next thing is I think you implied, Troy, is that you look at that ultrasound and you see different densities of color, or it's all black and white, but different densities of black and white, right? And as you said, if it's really dark color, that might be something hard, like a bone. And if it's kind of a translucent color, that might be like tissue or something. And, it's also like an X-ray. Actually, X-ray would be just as good of an analogy.
Huh.
So think of that. So first of all, we get the shape down there. So we know where are the low points, that's where your hydrocarbons are generated. Where are the faults, that's where your hydrocarbons migrate into reservoirs. Where are the highs, that's where your hydrocarbons are generally going to. So that's good.
Right.
So then by looking at those different color densities, the same ones you look at in an ultrasound or an X-ray, now I can understand what is on each side of those layers. So when I go to the field, you walk an outcrop in the field, right? You'll walk on one layer. You'll walk on a shale, and then you've got a rigid sandstone. And that's a very major interface in the field, right? You'll see the topography change as you go across those. Well, the seismic picks those up, right? So if I'm in the middle of a huge, thick shale package, I get no reflections. So it's transparent. It's like the tissues in the baby or on the X-ray. The minute I hit like so I'm going from a Wolfcamp shale to a whatever we'll call it. There's a little limestone layer. Suddenly the seismic knows that, just like the X-ray does. Bang, something's shifted. The seismic gives you a big kick there, a wiggle, as we call it sometimes for fun. So it gives you a big kick. And so that
that change in impedance, right?
That's exactly it. So it's a change in
power, which is kind of like a power of reflectance. Is that?
It's picking up the contrast between what's above and what's below an interface. And to be exact, I don't want to be a professor here, but impedance is the multiplication of simply density, how dense the rock above is versus how dense and the speed at which sounds travels through those two. So density times velocity of the shale. And then if the density and velocity of the limestone is very different, which it is in this case, you get a huge reflection coefficient. So the bigger the kick on those wiggles, say to the right, that tells me, hey, something big just changed there. And of course, then I follow that surface, right? I follow it along. I see if it's going up or down. I see beds truncate against it.
Oh, man.
And then, if I see this, let's pretend we just talked about this. I don't know if you're seeing my hands here. Shale and limestone. Now I've got a little, we'll call it porous sand encased in shale. It comes up, it truncates. That's called stratigraphic trap, subunconformity trap. It truncates there. Well, guess what's going to happen? The reflection coefficient, which just means how strong the signal is, it comes along, it follows that layer, and then it hits the beginning of my strat trap. It changes. Suddenly, I see something change. So let's say it's kicking to the right 10 units. It comes here. Oh, now it's kicking only 8 units. And it goes to the other side of the trap. Now it goes back to 10 units. So by making a map on that layer and looking at the strength of that signal, I can pick things up like subunconformity traps, of course, channels. Channels come and go, within a shale, porous sands surrounded by shale. So I can pick all those things up. So that's kind of the basic principles, very similar to X-rays.
So it's interesting to think about the unconventional Permian Basin seismic. You have a bunch of shale that the signal's kind of traveling well through, and it hits this carbonate body. And that body could just be this big round pad in the middle of the basin, just a big round pad, not much going on. Structurally, maybe it's cracked somewhere. But underneath that, I think that's the target, right? Where the shale and then under the carbonate turns to carbonate, you have void space there, right? There's a natural, easy to drill spot. So you get under the carbonates, drill along the top of them. That's where most of the oil from below is trapped in one of these pods that we're drilling horizontal wells in. That's kind of the idea, isn't it, for the Permian unconventionals?
I mean, what I will say is the Permian Basin is very complex from a stratigraphic standpoint. And so I like to say, people study stratigraphy, classical stratigraphy, and I always make fun of professors, right? Stratigraphy, they teach us like this book, right?
It's that cake. It's that cake.
Exactly. Here's layer 1, here's layer 2, and it's okay. Again, remember, I'm just kind of joking, but hey,
it's good though.
There you go. Here, you just learned stratigraphy 101, right? Now, the real world, throw that book away or whatever, the cake away. And the Permian Basin, which, has only been realized within the last, whatever, we'll call it 20 years.
That's
with
right.
This really good seismic. What we realize is the Permian Basin, it's just like a bunch of dumps. Like we have these high things, something dumped here, something dumped there, something dumps from the north, comes across. So it's a mishmash. I like to say the stratigraphy, instead of being what the book is, it's very complex. And so actually there can be very different kinds of traps and plays. Often it's just in the middle of shales, and it's to do with the depth and the temperature of that shale, sometimes how much it's fractured, and you can detect that with seismic. But I do want to touch on one key point you made, and seismic has always been underutilized. And I like to say my professor in geophysics, a brilliant man called Milo Backus, those Olga Nedra will know him, and others. He said when I was a student, we're not even scratching the surface of the information that the seismic holds. Then they interviewed him like 20 years later. He said, we're still barely scratching the surface. And I'm going to say today, maybe even more so in the Permian Basin, we're barely scratching the surface of what the seismic can do. And, part of the reason is, well, it takes time.
I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, it takes time. You got to pay people, and it takes time, and you need to get logs and so on. but it's short-sighted not to use more of that seismic information. And again, we're using just a fraction of it.
Is it an integration problem? Because the science and the mathematics and everything that goes into the visual of the structure that we all get to see in the final image, and we all make interpretations on, everyone agrees how that was put together. So we see a physical structure that we're drilling into and trying to understand. Is the problem by getting geophysics to the next level more geophysics discoveries, or is it the integration between what geophysics is with the next thing next door, another department that's figuring out the geochemistry? What is the hang up here, in your opinion, for seismic evolution?
I got to say, you guys come up with deep questions. So, I can't just fire off the answer. So let me say, I'm going to say in the Permian Basin, for many years, there was conventional wisdom that seismic is not useful in the Permian Basin. And I'm not talking about these last 5 years or 10 years, but, let's jump back a few decades.
Yeah.
There was conventional wisdom that, I'm drilling wells very densely, which we do in the Permian Basin. And yeah, you guys, the seismic, it's ambiguous. Sometimes it gets distorted, which can happen. Your image. You know what? I prefer just correlating my tops, and it's more accurate. So there was kind of I'll call it a negative mindset.
Acquiring through all those salts and anhydrites, and it's tough, right? It's
Absolutely.
Your data resolution isn't going to be nearly as good as something you'd see in the Gulf or somewhere offshore, right? So I can see what you mean by that.
Yeah, and so there was that mindset when I would tell people, hey, you guys, have you looked at seismic? We don't use that seismic stuff here in the Permian Basin. So again, this is decades ago. I'm not saying it's recently. Yeah. But then now you come to, here's another, it's a slight aside, but I like to say, you always find new fields at the very limits of the ability of any technology to see it. And by that, let's come to the Arkoma Basin. I work the Arkoma Basin. I was at CGG. We're shooting new spec lines, just like Fairfield does, spec shoot lines. And I looked at these structures, thrusted structures. Reservoirs were Spiro and Wapanaka formations, just in case you have any Arkoma Basin listeners. And I looked at those. I said, man, that's easy to find that stuff. And then I went and got the papers of when they actually discovered those fields 30 years earlier. And I looked at the seismics like, oh, wow, there's nothing there. These guys were drilling where it was just like the slightest hint of something. So this comes back to the issue. That's always the case. Look, when everybody can see it, they go drill, they go do it. So you're always pushing the limits of the seismic. And sure enough, Troy, the integration here, and I'm going to say most people don't like to do integration. Why? Because it's hard work. I could tell you as a geophysicist, and I tell this to the geophysicists I work with, that's easy. If once you loaded your SegWi file, you track a horizon, man, that thing goes, in many basins, that's easy. And guess what? I get on my fancy color palettes. I impress Troy and Skip. Man, look at those greens, look at those yellows. These geophysicist guys, they're really cool. Yeah, but I say, so what? And this is what I do with, by the way, the students. They show me this stuff. It's like, hey, man, look, the purple. And I say, so what? What does it mean? Oh, well, I don't really know what it means, but it looks really cool.
Yep.
Yeah, well, cool doesn't find oil. Cool doesn't make money.
Oh, my gosh.
So anyway, so long story short, it is hard work.
Purple.
And then I'm going to quote you. In fact, I've got this on another YouTube video. Why integration is difficult. Every piece of information is imperfect. So what you're looking at is what I call a least squares problem. So imagine a graph, right? And each piece of information, seismic is here, well logs are here, core data is there. It's all scattered, right? So our job in integration is, guess what? Unfortunately, they don't just fall on a line where you say, oh, well, here's the straight line. It matches the seismic. It matches the logs. It matches the core. It all fits, right?
Wow.
So you're looking at this really ambiguous thing, and you say, I got to put my best line through that. That's integration. And, if you try and do it, like we say, with the little red blobs that, kind of an inexperienced geophysicist will try and use, it's like, well, one point, yeah, anything fits that little point until you've told me something else.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I believe you. And I joke with him. I said, I'm not giving you any money for that. You haven't proven anything. You shown you got a little blob in your wiggles.
All right.
So that's the part that people miss.
I'm going to go off the wall here because I got some notes that you gave me.
Uh-oh.
What is it about the struggle of integration between departments, between ideas, because it's combative, right? I have my model and you have yours, and who's right. It's kind of it's not the best environment. It's not the funnest environment. You're not at the beach enjoying some beers. You're kind of arguing, you're working yourself to figure it out. Well, how does Shakespeare relate to that?
Oh God, man, you're really throwing a tough one on that.
Dang,
but I will
bring in the heat.
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot here, and
well, you're the Shakespeare.
You'll be pleased to hear I got my Shakespeare quotations with me.
So is that a book I need to buy? I think I need to buy that book.
Here's my recommendation. Really, everybody buy this book. Why? And I don't mean to get off on a tangent. Shakespeare was an incredible mind. Just accept that for now.
That's right.
And he had incredible ability to communicate super concisely.
Wow.
So anytime you open something here, it's like, man, you couldn't say it better than that. And we're talking about he's explaining human feelings. He's explaining how people are in situations. I mean, I'll still look at this again. I underline all my kind of favorite quotes, and he understood this perfectly, but he explained it. It wasn't like a 10-minute ramble. He explained it in like a few key phrases. So that's why Shakespeare, to me, is fun and is critical. So if you're working in the English language, if you're writing articles, if you're practicing speaking, read Shakespeare, read them out loud, and you're going to get the rhythm, and you're going to be able to communicate more effectively. So now the second piece of your question about integration is you are back to the human side, so you're talking about egos, you're talking about turf, you're talking about precedents. Well, we've always been the ones to decide the final answer. Who are these guys coming in from this other department telling us it's not our answer? We've improved a lot. Again, that's 50 years ago, probably, where they all sat in their corners. Geophysicists were in one corner, geologists were in another. They didn't share any information. We've really come a long ways. Seismic has helped that, because seismic is a great integration tool. Yep. But hey, we're all humans, right? No one's perfect yet. So I hope I kind of satisfactorily addressed your Shakespeare question.
Hey, you absolutely did. I appreciate it. I told you I was coming off the wall with that one, but it felt like it was going to be interesting. Skippo, anything else as far as just the fundamentals of seismic, the recording of it, kind of what we talked about, or we want to jump into this?
I want to get your opinion on shear wave seismic, and I want to know, in your opinion, what the benefits and what the pitfalls of that is, because you always hear about this, like if we only had shear wave, if we blah 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 blah, if we had a 9 component blah 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 blah, and
great question.
And it's like that's the solution to everything. And is it really the solution, or will it help us get closer to that solution?
And, I'm going to say over the years, what I've concluded is nothing is ever the solution. Because, again, we're in a multidisciplinary world where, again, every piece of information is imperfect. So I don't care what it is, whether it's a drilling technique, whether it's a logging technique, whether it's a seismic technique. No one technique will ever be the solution. The nice thing about shear waves is that, remember, we talked about this cross plot where every piece of information, it's giving you another point in there. It is giving you another perspective on the subsurface. And, any perspective on the subsurface gives you more points to try and decide, does my line go this way? Does my line go that way? So, I'm supportive of that method. Now, all these methods, in the end, it's always a cost-benefit balancing act, right? And, getting to the shear wave methods, if you're going to do new acquisition, and I was working in Denver when they came up, the Colorado School of Mines Consortium came up with this 3D 9C. So 3D acquisition, 9 component. And I was at CGG, and we went out with the special phones. Wow. And, we've used that. But that's expensive, so that you better be fairly sure. Now, we can also get that information by using the offsets. So the farther your most distant recording channel is, the more different the angle is in the subsurface. I didn't go into that, but when you hit these layers this way, you look at a certain picture. But then if you change the angle and look at it at 20 degrees, you actually get a slightly different picture. If you look at 30 degrees, you get another. So that's used in the Gulf Coast and Nigeria, places where they talk about AVO. You've probably heard that. Yep. Amplitude versus
offset.
So what drives AVO? Shear wave information. So you're not recording it, but you're studying the effects of changes in shear waves by the variation in amplitudes versus offset. So there are a range of techniques, and people are doing that right now in the Permian Basin. They are using those far offsets and the far angles to get shear wave information without putting those crews out there. And I would say that's becoming very routine. So one should use that.
That's a calculation of P wave to S wave based on some kind of algorithm thing.
That's correct. Well, it's actually not that difficult. It's the P wave velocity divided by the shear wave velocity. Yeah. That's it. And
wow.
Yeah.
VP over VS is one of the key. Yeah, that's really the key information, because until that point, remember when you just have P waves, you just know the velocity of P waves.
Right.
So that one piece of information. You get the shear wave, you get a different measurement.
Oh, by setting it offset, you're actually recording the shear wave.
Yeah.
You're getting a signal related to the shear wave velocity, to be exact. But yes, you're not recording the shear wave itself, but you're seeing the effects of the changes in shear wave properties, if that makes sense. And it means you get that information without having to put a special shear wave crew.
Right.
That's why it's very cost effective to use far offset data in the Permian Basin, and it's used.
Yeah.
Now I'll do a quick other thing that you may hear about, anisotropy. It's a big word, right? Great big long word. But when you go to the field, I can put my source here, my receiver there, right? And measure a point in the subsurface, like north and south. Then I can take that crew, I can move it around, and now I'm recording across that east and west. And guess what? Just like shear wave information is new, that reading going east-west is different from the reading going north-south. And if you go northeast, southwest, it's another reason. So in effect, what happens is now, because of all these recording channels and the compute power, we're now recording at all these angles, which is giving us even more information. Yeah. Why is it important? Because it's being used, and I'm not saying it's easy, but at the leading edge of technology, they're using it to recognize fracture detection and fracture density.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
and
so something importantly, and Skippo, your thesis kind of brought this to my attention. When you have the ability to start making predictions as a geologist of which direction the fractures would be possibly going, based on
structural geology.
Right. The real big structural geology. Everything broke this way, and then everything started breaking this way. Like, it's very predictive on how structure fractures. But what you're doing is, okay, you can go that way, and you can run your lines the same way those two structures were actually popping, and then that, through the tectonic events. Now you can go 360. You run angles all through that. Whoa.
That and awesome. So, the implication of that is that, sadly for geologists, and again, I'm kind of joking, but sadly for geologists, you go to the outcrop here at the edge of the basin, and you say, oh, my faults are going this way. And you go to the other edge of the basin, oh, my faults are going that way. Therefore, in between, they must be doing this. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Mother Nature always throws a kink. So you do that. You come in the middle, and darn, they rotated 45 degrees. That's why you need the seismic to understand the anisotropy in your acreage position, not just, nothing against geologists. I love being in the field, but I'm just saying that's only a piece of the information. You do need to use it, but you'd better get your anisotropy and your fracture direction and density. You can also make an estimate of how densely fractured these zones are. Get that from your 3D seismic. And again, we're just scratching the surface of that right now.
Yeah. But that's like you said, though, that's also kind of the beauty of integration with source to sink, right? If you look at outcrop and you're looking at that real rock and you're seeing how these fractures are being created based on not only just the uplift of the outcrop itself, but by the orientation of those primary fault zones going through the basin, now you can say, okay, these shear are these lateral or strike slip faults that are going in this orientation or opening up fractures here. Then you take that seismic and you're looking at, oh, hey, we have a density of fractures in this zone. We can make a prediction that they're going to be opened in this orientation and they'll probably be closed in this orientation based on what we saw on that outcrop. But that's kind of the beauty of the whole story. And that's what I love about seismic data, because it's painting that picture of the subsurface and then just allowing your mind to figure out all the complexities of Mother Nature and all these little pockets of, oh, maybe if we drill here, a horizontal well here, we don't need to pump as much down, or maybe if we drill here, we're going to get too much water. That's like little things like that come up when you're doing exploration. Is just
well, those fracture densities and directions will have major impact on your IPs, your initial potentials, your decline rate. So they're tied to money, so there's no doubt. But now, since you guys put me on the spot, I'm going to give you a little something. Now, Shakespeare didn't write this. I came up with it. It's not going to be on the same scale, but I will tell you, it ties into integration. So when I was there at Imperial College, I had a professor, and he came up and he told us the best geologist is the one who has seen the most rocks. And it sounded logical, but as I worked over my career, you know what I concluded? And this is only one piece of this. I'm going to tell you the other piece in a moment. The best geologist is the one who's seen the most seismic lines, because when you start looking at regional seismic lines, you get to see, again, not just what's happening here. You get to see these structural styles. You get to map these things in 3D. Of course, the reality is you should have been in the outcrop to understand them. But, again, you'll understand a lot more as a geologist. You embrace seismic, you work with it. Now, what's the second piece? The best geophysicist is not the one who comes up with the red color palette or whatever. It's not right. The little blobs, lots of blobs. I can create thousands of blobs for you anytime you want. But the one who has seen the most rocks. Wow. So like I say, Shakespeare didn't write this, but maybe he could have if he had been around. If he had been born in Slayton, Texas, he might have come up with that. So like I say, the best geologist is the one who has seen the most seismic, and the best geophysicist is the one who has seen the most rocks.
Yeah. Now, motivation for integration is an interesting concept, because there's a prize to do it, right? You got to be willing to do it. So now today we have two arguments to the model that we're all using. Skippo said source to sink. Well, there's deep to seep now. What is this concept of serpentinization and these deep processes that are connected to the crust and totally integrated with what we see in the reservoirs? The story is much bigger than we ever thought. So now we have a motivator. There's a new model to come together, integrate, and test. We've tested the source to sink a lot. Somebody's out there, and I know they are, because I am, and we're testing the other model. And that is what's fascinating. That's what's driving, I think, integration.
Well, not to cut you off again, but it's not just source to sink or deep to seep. It's both, right? That's the true integration of it all, right? Understanding what's going on in the subsurface and then what's going on from top to bottom, and how those two methods blend together. That's the beauty in it.
Bang, love it. Perfect.
Yeah. But I will say, and I think I mentioned this to Troy the other day, I'm what I call a bottoms up seismic interpreter. So, someone says, hey, look at this nice seismic line. See my prospect? And I say, I don't want to see your prospect. I want to look at the bottom of the seismic. So I go right down to the bottom. It's like, oh, okay, here's a big fault down here. Okay, that might have impacted that prospect.
Absolutely.
And if that fault moved after that trap was formed up here, maybe it did something that caused the oil to leak or the gas to leak, etc. So, I'm a believer from, you go as deep as you can. You think it's all to spur thinking. In the end, it's all about the thinking, right? I mean, these shear waves, anisotropy, deep plumes, whatever. The real purpose is to expand your thinking. And that's what we tell the students. Many do think, like, I push the F5 key that's supposed to find the oil, I'm ready to go. No, you don't know anything.
I press my inversion button and it does everything for me.
That's correct. There's a lot of that thinking. And I'll tell you, we see that. Like, I know what's going on, but there's one attribute which is called sweetness. And it seems like you've probably heard it for the last. And by the way, I know the lady who came up with it. I've got nothing against it, but I don't know. She must have some kind of LinkedIn campaign or something, because all my students come in and goes, oh, we ran sweetness. We know where the oil is. It's like, no, you don't. So, and the point is, again, it's not that there's anything wrong with the attribute. It was created for a purpose, integrated with other information. It's an excellent attribute. But if you just walk in and think, I run sweetness, and I'll give you a quick example of that in the Gulf of Mexico data sets, I work with some of my students. Guess where the biggest sweetness anomalies are? Right in the bottom of synclines. And so what happens is, in the Gulf of Mexico, these bottoms of synclines, they're close to faults. They're just like overpressured, very porous, wet sands. And those are way bigger than the anomalies at the true commercial hydrocarbon locations.
Mhm.
So yeah, you go around looking for all the big red blobs, you're going to drill a bunch of dry holes in the bottom of synclines. You go look at the little tough one that maybe you need a bit more information to confirm, and you're going to have to tell you, well, that's the one that's going to make you money.
Yeah.
Wow.
I like that. I like that a lot, because I think that was something that, I mean, I learned definitely, was being able to understand and co-render different attributes, right? To cross-check one another, because each attribute will tell you something. There isn't, like you said, there isn't an oil attribute. These attributes tell you a very specific thing that's going on within the seismic data, and then you can make interpretations based on that, right? It's like you said, is it an oil button, or is it the bottom of a syncline where we just have a bunch of overpressured sand, right?
That's right. Yeah. But no, that's it. It's all about the integration. Again, nothing for or against any single attribute. There's nothing wrong with sweetness if you're using it correctly, if you're tying it. And the authors of these attributes, they would tell you the same thing. But people think, oh, here's a shortcut. F6 finds the oil. No.
All right, let's now transition for the rest of drill down into this experience, this incredible experience that I haven't been able to talk to anybody. I have not personally had this conversation with someone who has been involved from the beginning to end of the $2 billion investment.
Well, relatively early to, I'll call it about midpoint. And we can drill down on those elements. So,
please.
So, first of all, I was not the founder. Founders of these companies that can raise $2 billion, they have to have a certain pedigree, and the founder came from a major oil company and had been, exploration manager. I was much more on the technical side, but I was brought in on the technical side. So here's one thing with a private equity company. This was the first time I went to a job and I paid them to work for them. So you want to be part of our private equity company? Well, you have to invest in the company.
Gotcha.
So I wrote a check on my first day with quite a few zeros that it took me a long time before any salary ever recompensated me for that. And that's okay. They want people to believe in the venture. So that's what I will say. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, most people who believe in something are ready to invest, whether it's their time, whether it's their money. And I like to say, so this is part one. You don't learn the oil business for real until you have put your own money in the oil business.
Wow.
I'm just going to say that when, and not to take away from anybody, but it really hurts when you had to write that first check. I'm showing up at work and I'm paying them. Wow. Right. But that's the way it works often in these private equity companies. Nothing wrong with that. Now, I'm afraid I have to tell you that in the end, that venture didn't pan out. So I actually lost all my investment.
Wow.
So the second thing I will tell you is you don't really learn the oil business till you've lost money in the oil business. You'll learn if you invest, but until you lose some of that money, you won't really understand. After that, you're even more careful. You're even more concerned about integration and getting things done and so on.
Wow.
So now you could ask, so why did that company not end up being successful? Well, as we know in this business, many factors, including price cycles, and absolutely price cycles were a big thing. They raised the money in good times, which I think was about 2011 or so, maybe 2010. Wow. And there was the crash that came in around 2014 or so. I don't have the price chart in front of me, but somewhere around there. So they got hit very hard. Now, that wasn't the only factor, but that was a key factor. The other thing is they had a strategy, and that's fine. Each private equity venture has a strategy. The strategy of we're swinging for the fences. That was the strategy, right? So we don't really look at little amplitudes, right? In fact, and really backed up, integrated amplitudes. I'm not saying bad ones. There are still amplitudes to be found in the Gulf of Mexico. They tend to be small. They're not going to give you huge returns. They're not company makers. So this company, did decide we're swinging for the fences, largely driven by the investors' request, by the way. So, hey, this management team, you're swinging for the fences. So nothing against the management team. Now, what they found themselves doing is, guess what they did? They started working subsalt Gulf of Mexico. We're talking $300 million wells, right? Wow. You're partnering with the big guns, So now I'm partners with, the good news is I'm partnered with Chevron. I'm partners with Anadarko. I'm partners. But guess what? When you get a cash call, you need some big money all of a sudden, right?
Yes,
And by the way, as an investor, every cash call had the name Alan Bertagne on it. So here's 300 million, and Alan, here's your piece of the 300 million that you're paying for.
working interest, we call it.
That is correct. That is correct. And so that's the way they structure. Again, this is done all the time, but I'm just saying this focuses the mind, right? And so anyway, but just to say, yeah, hey, cash calls are really scary things, by the way. If you don't get cash calls, it's like, oh my God, here comes the next cash call. That means I got to get in the old days, it was a paper check. Now it's a digital check or whatever, but I got to write a check for this amount, and, those keep coming, right? Oh, good news is we're going to drill another well with Chevron. Bad news is I got to write my check on that. So anyway, but that's okay. But here's the bottom line. So if you do not have very, very deep pockets, it's tough to play with the big guys. So what we found ourselves doing is here we are, 12% working interest in this multi-billion dollar, like, okay, so you drilled your $300 million well. Now I need 4 appraisal wells, and someday I'm going to build a huge facility. You know how much cash that needs? And the other thing is some of these big discoveries out there, subsalt, long ways offshore, they weren't coming online for 10 years. So now, yeah, or 5, at least 5 anyway. Maybe I'm exaggerating slightly. But here you are as a small company. I'm 12% working interest, so I have no say, right? It's going to be Chevron that's going to decide, and we'll pretend Exxon, right? So you 12%, you be quiet. You can come to our meetings and sit in. And sure, if Alan's got something cool on the seismic to show us, we'll listen to Alan for a little bit, and then we'll do what we want, kind of thing. So again, I'm kind of having a bit of fun here, but you get the idea. Look,
Absolutely.
you hold 50%, you're in control, or 51. And so what they found themselves is with what I'm going to call stranded assets. So we had discoveries, we were technical successes. We had found oil, we had teamed up with the big companies, we'd made good decisions, but we didn't have the deep pockets to write it out. And then when that price crash came, now you've really limited your abilities to get more money, to write it out. And so in the end, I forget what happened because I'd left by then.
Yeah.
And, at that point, I forget, the other investors, the big guys, they just kind of squeezed, it's like, well, listen, we'll give you this much. So by the end of it, there wasn't much left of that investment. And that's okay. That, like we said, this is like my crash of 86. I learned a lot from losing that money.
It's interesting analog kind of for me because I'm learning more and more about the mining industry. And one of the problems in the mining industry is, okay, you have a discovery. Okay, you think it's worth the much. And I agree. But it's going to take me a lot of time and a lot of effort to get that to production, to sales. So there's a huge disconnect in explorers, I think, thinking about who are you selling this project to? And you better have that lined up and secured. And that's what I got from your story on that for sure, along with many other stuff. That was incredible.
Yeah. No, that is a key thing. And of course, this all comes down to these private equity people and other business people. They got this little thing they call NPV 10.
Yeah,
right?
I heard this.
Yeah. And so that just means that, they run their numbers, their economics as if we'll pretend you're borrowing money from the bank at 10%, right? Mm-hmm. And you pay them the 10% back every year, right? That's the interest rate you're paying the bank back. And whatever is left after that is your real profit, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when something, and by the way, NPV 10 is a really simple equation in Excel. You could go find it, just NPV. So I don't have an MBA, but I can run NPV 10 calculations. But bottom line is when you delay something, just test it. Just run NPV 10 where you get, whatever. I invest 1, I get 10 back in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. That NPV 10 eats the value really, really quickly. And so that's scary when something needs many years to come get your money back or to be put online. In that case, the oil sat there. It's like, well, we still need to discuss if we're going to produce it this way or that way, build a pipeline over here, build a pipeline over there.
Like depending how we're going to build out this field, right? That's how we got to build the infrastructure. And so I can imagine, great, we got this discovery, but we're going to plug it. And we're going to, like you said, 5-6 years before we even decide how we're going to either develop the rest of this field or even if we want to produce it based on the price itself. So that's a scary.
And I do believe one of those fields is on track to be produced. I think one of them is still stranded, if I recall. I haven't checked them recently. And so that one, maybe another 5 years. Well, by then MPV-10 is close to zero, probably.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm pretty sure we're going to do multiple shows, Alan, because there's just so much to talk about. We need to get into the completion part of the show now. That was drilled down, and man, that was me and Skip started a podcast, and we weren't sure what was going to happen, but it was about our experiences in the Permian Basin. And we experienced these and had these conversations with all these other colleagues that were experiencing the Permian Basin. So our show, you were born there. You certainly have experience in the Permian Basin. And that's what we actually created. We didn't know that we were going to do this, but it's a very unique network that we've created. And this unique network has totally new ideas, new information being put together, and then we're applying it to real world applications. We're trying to make a difference. And at the end of the day, above everything that we do, we're trying to lower our risk. That's what the PBE podcast is. This is our experience with Mr. Alan Bertagne. Let's roll into the completion part of the show, sir. I've enjoyed this, Skippo.
Oh, man, this has been a blast. I'm not going to lie.
And you guys have been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you here. You've had some great questions, including the Shakespeare one.
So your investment back into the college students, I mean, Evolve, when you were showing me some of those slides, and maybe this is where you can share some of your screen, it is incredible. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like Evolve has truly created one of the most important things in the entire planet right now. It's the integration of young minds thinking of using geology, geophysics, geoscience to try to understand the subsurface. And this integration between all these regions and all this culture that you're doing at Evolve is, I mean, that's fascinating to me. I mean, you guys are building it. They're doing it. Teams from America around the world coming together. Tell us more about Evolve.
Evolve is an SEG program, and it's basically, think of it as a 6-month virtual internship for the students using real world data sets. So this was virtual before COVID. So the idea was, even before then, that we were working in Zoom, we were working in some cases in the cloud, and we're taking, as we said, these universities and these students from all over the world, and we give them real world data sets. So we give them that Gulf of Mexico data, and we give them real well trajectories, directional surveys. We give them real LAS files or raster images, just plain old, those things that people used to draw on, etc. And we only give them one aspect of the exercise. We say, here's your data, go find me the best investment opportunity here.
Wow.
That's it. So we don't say
earths, doesn't matter. Carbon sequestration, rare earths, oil and gas, mine, anything.
So I got to tell you, so I'm going to tell a story, but I will say the other thing, the key to this is, for them, it's real world. And believe me, it's almost a shock to them. They're used to, again, what they learn in school, things are like this, and, to find oil is supposed to be easy, et cetera. And then suddenly we just throw them in the deep end where, by the way, we don't even know the answers. And we do that on purpose. But the key is we got all these mentors. And so like last week, we had what we call mid-project presentations. I told some of the students, you know how many years of experience we have in this digital rooms? 400 plus years. I said, you know how many times in your career you're going to have 400 years of experience in front of you? Probably zero.
Wow.
Because, many of these companies, they let those people go. It's sad. Right. So that's what we provide them. We throw them in the deep end with some very, very tough challenges, but we have all these hundreds of years of experience and mentors that support them.
Incredible.
So basically that's it. But as far as them being creative, they catch us off guard sometimes. So one year we gave this team Mississippi Canyon or Main Pass data in the Gulf of Mexico. So we say, how's it looking? What do you think your investment opportunity is going to be? Is it going to be like Miocene turbidites or this and that? Oh, well, we think we're going to go for gas hydrates in here.
Oh,
man. So and guess what? They were engineers. And so I looked at my colleagues and you said, we hadn't thought of that, honestly. And we like to say, we learned too, so we hadn't really thought of that. But you know what? The engineers, that's not a bad idea. I said, you show me the economics, you show me it can work.
Right.
That's a very valid exercise here.
And the regulations. You're still in
and that too, of course.
Not going to work out too good.
But that's the key, that it is a 6-month virtual internship we're talking, they're working in Petrel, they're working in Halliburton's decision space software, they're working in Kingdom. They're using some of these high-end tools like Geophysical Insights, Paradise software.
What's the start end date of that 6 months?
Well, it used to be longer, but then our college professors got onto us and told us we had to follow a semester. So we basically start, January 1st,
Okay.
plus or minus, and then the main phase ends at the end of May. Now, because it's the student program is SEG, we like to have them go to the annual meeting, which is usually like September. You've been to it. You were there.
Yeah.
So September, October. So some of them, of course, they go to field camps and things, but those that can stay with us, we work with them. So by the end, those who have got the time have worked with us for 10 months.
Wow.
And then they come, and then the culmination of all this is they come to the annual meeting, and we make them do what we call the NAPE presentation. I think you're familiar with North American Prospect Expo. So it's like, okay, students, you did your 45-minute presentation to us all. That's easy. You got 12 minutes to summarize your 10 months of work now and tell us why we should be investing in your prospect.
Wow.
Why I need to open up the checkbook? Why do I need to have your prospect on my portfolio?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, we've got a great, all the mentors are great, but one in particular, maybe you need to get him on the show sometime. He's Mr. Scott King. He was at a company that was in the Permian Basin and I think other places, Matador Petroleum, and then and then he IPO'd it. I forget what I can't remember. The second Matador was Matador Resources. He was part of the management team. He hired a bunch of people that now work in the Permian Basin.
Wow.
And he's one of our mentors. And he always says it's the students, usual. They start at strat column, like here's my strat column. And again, remember, they've just come out of college. So they start, the Gulf of Mexico opened in Jurassic, here's the salt. And then they go through every single layer and tell us this one's 58 feet thick, this one's 62 feet. And he says, I don't care what the stratigraphy is. I want to know which zones you want me to invest in and why. Yeah. And so it's most of them have never had that kind of real hard-hitting feedback. And so it is a life-changing experience for these students. I will also tell you.
And I think you're doing a very valuable thing by basically teaching these students, hey, you're a geologist, but your main goal is to de-risk and add value to these prospects, right? It's not to tell us, your favorite, fossil or, whatever in this formation. Your goal is to tell me this is where you drill, this is where you make money.
And we remind them of that. And, at the beginning, they're almost invariably like that. Like, here's the strat column with here are the dinosaurs and here are the ammonites and here's the whatever, the trilobites. Like, hold on, there's nothing wrong with those. You use those to establish the ages, but I want to know where I'm going to put my money and why.
Wow.
And so we take them through prospect generation. And a lot of this, by the way, is regional exploration. And we get people, many of the national oil companies, they work field studies. So they do, they build a reservoir model. They got 150 wells in 1 square mile or a few square miles. Yep. They do the reservoir model. They're doing reservoir simulation, et cetera. Then they come here and I say, here's an area like Matagorda Island, offshore Gulf of Mexico. This area is huge. Mm-hmm. You're not working in an area where somebody already found the oil. You got to find the oil first before you do all that. And it's a totally different experience. When you're used to working that postage stamp, and now it's like, I got faults everywhere. I got potential reservoirs everywhere. Where do I even begin? Huge learning experience. We teach them volumetrics, how to calculate how much oil is actually in their prospect or gas. Yep. And then we teach them, basic level economics, including MPV 10.
I was going to say, would you take them through kind of like a general, more, I'm not saying this method exactly, but like a Rose and Associates kind of risk analysis method?
I can tell you that Rose and Associates is one of the companies supporting it. So the students get the Rose and Associates software.
That's
and I'm trying to think. So, we're supported by a whole series of company, Drilling Info / Enverus helps. When we've got our offshore Matagorda Island teams, they get the data, the production data, so they can look at production profiles in, whichever county there or down south, compare it, get analogs. So they're getting a lot of support. And again, the key is working with the mentors and the people with decades and decades of experience.
Right. I would love to talk to you more, and we can do this offline, about the Research Institute, Magma Research Institute. We got involved with the University of Guelph out of Ontario, Canada. There are now 30 students and 5 teams, and they're studying magma chem science, the model that we have applied to all the different industries. And I would love to get this team, because they're good, man. They're writing reports, they're sending us stuff, they're engaged in it. I mean, teaming up somehow with that idea mixed with Evolve for a bigger final presentation that integrates departments, integrates totally. These are business majors, these are non-scientists, business majors that are understanding what Evolve's doing and understanding it as how do you move with that information. If that information is true or it has an approximation of reality, how do you make a business out of it? How do you get it to the next level? I'd love to talk to you more about that. That'd be fascinating.
Yeah, would be happy to do that. And again, the relationships we build over, whether it's 6 months or 10 months, I call them lifelong relationships. These students, they call me like, oh, I'm interviewing with these 3 companies. Here's what I'm getting from this. What do you think I should do?
Wow.
And, I kind of give them background information. Now, I should mention in passing that, it was pretty simple that if this works so well for these students, it might work for early career professionals, 0 to, we'll call it 5 years, or, even Mr. Mike Forrest, they call him the father of bright spots because he is. And that's another story. We'll talk about that another time. But, he's got 6 years of experience and he says, I'm learning all the time. So 0 to 10 years. So we've come up with Evolve Professional, which is specifically for people that have just started their careers, want to be exposed to people with 30, 40, 50, 60 years of experience. I recommend, by the way, data from totally different areas because, geology, you got to stretch your mind all the time. So if you're working Permian Basin, come work a data in the Gulf of Mexico. Or if you're in the Gulf of Mexico, come work something in the Permian Basin. And so we have Evolve Professional. We've set up a separate entity to deal with that, and it's called Next Gen Training Partners.
Wow.
And that's for Evolve Professional and other things. But anyway, yeah, we think that we just built an incredible relationship with the students. They're lifelong relationships. Maybe you'll get some of them on the show here someday.
Yeah,
they're going to do some great things.
Yes, let's do it. That'd be great shows to have. Me and Skips were picking their brain about what they're doing, what they're thinking.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, many of them have some are in Equinor, some gone like Shearwater, the service company. I'm just trying to think. Some have gone to other places like Oceaneering, the surveying company. One of our Mexico students went to Oceaneering. I'm trying to Schlumberger. Several of them have ended up in Schlumberger. One's in Romania. And again, these students are all over the world. They're networks for life.
Wow. That is fantastic. The investment back into the next generation is a huge thing for you, obviously. Yep. And on behalf of everybody you get to work with that is a young professional or in graduate school, I mean, just thank you for your time and your attention to do that because it's huge. That is really doing something. So thank you.
And, just to kind of relate back to that point, as I kind of look at what I'm doing, I learned a lot of lessons along the way. It was challenging. I've had quite a few busts, oil price ups and downs. I think the students coming out now or the early career professionals, I'm afraid I think you're going to have the same. You're going to have some ups and downs. And if I can help them, if I can share some experiences with them, that's what I enjoy doing. Maybe they'll avoid one or two of the little glitches or mistakes I made along the way. So could I end on one Shakespeare quote?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So, you might say, so, and people ask me this, why are you doing this, Alan? And some of the students, they'll come at the end of the year and say, man, you gave so much of yourself. Why are you doing this? So Shakespeare, guess what? He already had it covered here. Happens to be one of his lesser known plays called Measure for Measure. Okay. And, a little bit of Old English. So I may have to go a little bit slowly, but he says, heaven doth with us as we with torches do. So a torch, right? Not light them for themselves. For if our virtues did not go forth of us, 'twere all alike as if we had them not. So what he's saying is when you've been given whatever skills or you've built some skills, the real reason you got them is to share them with others. And if you don't do that, it's as if you never had those skills. Wow. So 14, whatever it was, 92 or actually 15 or something, Shakespeare had it covered.
Wow. Yeah. Get involved in the story. You can't sit and watch life. That doesn't work. It's not a Netflix documentary.
Well,
get involved.
Well, exactly. And if you've been blessed with a career that you're able to earn a living, time to share with others. You made it, you enjoyed life. help the next generation to build their own career, to learn from your experience. Don't just sit there. I mean, take some vacations, do some things. And I joke with Mr. Mike Forrest, one of the greats of the industry. Again, we could do a show on him with him. He's 90 years old. He gets up at 3 a.m. He's writing notes on his yellow pad. He's got ideas. He works with the student. What an inspiration. That's what we should all be like. He's my role model.
Wow. That was a fantastic show. I hope we get to do another one in another way and definitely stay connected. Skippo, I think this is the end of our experience with Alan Bertagne.
This was, I've enjoyed every bit of this show. This was fantastic. I want to say other words, but we'll keep it professional. Fantastic.
I have too. You guys are great. And I want to be in Midland here whenever it is, just over a month away, I think. I'll be there with you.
We'll be in touch. You'll know it all. Yep. You'll know details. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Bertagne.
Thank you. Great pleasure for me.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Mr. Bertagne.
Yeah.
And we're out.
And we're out.